Hello, in this video you'll learn how to use Dapper in .NET 10 in this case. It's a sort of more lightweight EF-core, if you will. You probably already know about it a bit if you're watching this video. But essentially we kind of just compare it to the good old ADO.NET. It is supposed to be a bit more simpler perhaps to use, simpler to set up, but the reality of it is perhaps it's not so simple. So we are looking at the whole thing in a sort of minimal API light. This is a simple minimal API project, and we just put into those direct execution paths a little database interaction. So nothing too complicated here, just we just have a product table, and we have some products which you can insert or retrieve. That's essentially all that there is to. Now, to set it up and to actually be able to use it, you'll need to install NuGet packages first. You need the Dapper, and then you also need Microsoft.Data.SqlClient. So that's what you would use for ADO.NET as well. Again, it uses all those things. It's just a sort of perhaps you have a better way to get started with it. But let's look at the code and let's see how it all works. So we do need a connection string, just like any other arrangement with SQL Server. For example, although this works with other databases as well, just like EF-core. So you can use with Postgres or MySQL. It doesn't really matter that much. But there is some manual labor involved. The idea here is that you can connect to databases without having to construct the whole sort of data migration, data set setups, which you do need for EF-core. Of course, that makes it a bit easier to provide the data or to retrieve data. You can map all your data, essentially your database tables, to actual C# classes, your models, and that is why we use EF-core. That's made simple. Of course, there's also the migrations, but again, the idea here is you would perhaps have some setup where you have your migrations, or perhaps you just have your database definition separately, and you just need to connect here. However, for more complex arrangements, probably using good old ADO.NET is quite a decent idea, because if we look here, we have the setup. We just need to add scoped IDbConnection. That's a whole setup essentially, and we add specifically SQL connection from SQL, essentially from SQL Server. And that's it. We return that, and it's registered, and it's ready to go. You don't need to do anything else. Now you can inject that into your services, or in this case, into this minimal API arrangement. So we just use DB, but as you can see, we will be having a little query. However, you do need to have a reference to it, right? We don't have data sets. We don't have the whole EF-core arrangement. So we need one of two things. Either we have the direct SQL, which quite unlikely if you're connecting to existing arrangements. It's always better to just have a stored procedure. Or alternatively, you'll have a stored procedure. Now, if you're familiar with ADO.NET, one of those arrangements, perhaps more traditional arrangement, you'll find it sort of similar. We just have perhaps a little easier way to access it, because we just take a record, and whatever is in the select, as long as it matches the record, it will be directly sort of mapped to that object, to that definition. But we still need to provide either the just the whole query itself, which is never really a good idea, although for some quick arrangement perhaps it might be quite useful, or we need to provide the stored procedure name. Now, something to look at here at a few options. We have quite a few options, basically all the options you would have in sort of traditional ADO.NET arrangement. We have the parameters, we also have the command type. So don't forget, if you're using stored procedure, the default command type won't apply. You'll need to specify it, which will be the stored procedure. And for that, we can look at one of the other arrangements here. We have post, So we insert a product into that little product database. It's nothing fancy, just a very simple database. But in this case, we do actually have a stored procedure. And this is where it gets sort of more interesting. We take a request, our object, and we need to somehow map it to what we actually insert. And so here it becomes not so minimal and very much alike to AddoNet, and you might say in some cases it sort of defeats the purpose, especially if you're used to AddoNet arrangement, then perhaps using that might be easier and more efficient. But essentially what we want to do is take dynamic parameters, and nothing too interesting here. We would just pass parameters to the stored procedure parameters. They need to match as they usually do. One sort of more interesting perhaps thing, the way we can return data, we can use these parameters and the new ID will be in the stored procedure that's returned through the stored procedure. It should be set up in the stored procedure itself. We have a data type and we have direction. So output direction, then that means we will be able to return it. Now we add the parameters in the same execute async that we have without stored procedure. But again, as mentioned previously, you will need to add not only parameters, but also the command type to specify that it is stored procedure. It's an easy mistake to make, and you have the same sort of problem, if you will, with AddoNet. With anti-framework, of course, is completely different, so we don't have that problem. But the way you can get the parameters, you can access them once it is executed, of course, you can access it and basically fetch the parameters based on the direction. So in this case, we just retrieve new ID. Now you could, if you have a return body or some of that nature, if you do select, then we can go back here, perhaps to this one, we can select just the product. In this case, you can also see we are passing ID as a sort of one-off parameter. However, that is a filter parameter which will get applied to this parameter. So you can actually do it this way if you want, or you can do it in parameter way. So there's sort of two arrangements to actually do it. But again, the return type, if you select, you can actually directly map to your object, which is kind of useful and is kind of interesting, although there are quick ways to do that with AddoNet these days. So perhaps this is just adding unnecessary complications to your projects. Other than that, we again can get that, the return for the parameter, and then we just set up a new return, but that's not related to the whole arrangement. So again, it is lightweight, but it is very similar to AddoNet arrangements, and the only sort of benefit of it compared to actual AddoNet is, of course, you get all these query single or default, you get a bit of entity framework in it. So you get that sort of automated mapping from your actual return, and different kinds of queries you can also have on the actual data, because as you can see, we don't necessarily do additional sort of filtering anywhere here, but that will fetch just a simple result or a default result. So there's a bit of sort of no handling, if you will. But other than that, as you can see, all of these are quite similar. So again, you can use it for sure. It's more lightweight, it's more sort of robust in performance kind of a way compared to Entity Framework. And if you just need to access a database without having to move things around, do some arrangement with API calls to access different data from different APIs, then maybe it's the way to go. But again, do consider just the sort of good old original AddoNet. There might be more control. It might be useful to do that as well. And that said, we will conclude this video.